An important element of Microsoft networking and Microsoft servers, really for the entirety of this century, has been the idea of Active Directory. Active Directory as a way to manage users, as a way to manage resources. Well, now we're seeing that introduced into the Azure environment through Azure Active Directory. Now, Azure Active Directory is not on-premises Active Directory. There are significant differences both in terms of the protocols that they use, as well as what they store and what they're used for. But the concept in terms of having a centralized place to manage at least your users is consistent. And that's really what Azure Active Directory is. And I like this term. It is Managed Identity and Access Management. Great way of describing this. Now, I typically see it in three core conceptual parts or functions. You absolutely have the ability to manage identities, manage users, okay? And you can use that to, well, actually, you can use it for a couple ways. So that's one thing. You can use it to manage things. You can use it to provide management for Azure itself. And you can also use it to integrate with your custom applications. So I can use Azure Active Directory as my custom application authentication mechanism and the users there. And in fact, there are, and we'll talk about this, hundreds of applications, web-based applications, cloud-based applications that are out there that are doing this, right? But then the other thing that it does is it can act as a federator as well, which is pretty cool stuff. So it can work with some external authentication as well. So, but again, all of that falls under that broad identity or that broad umbrella of managed identity and access management. Okay? It does provide, as I mentioned, a rich single sign-on solution. And in fact, this can be a sign-on solution, we'll talk about this, that actually comes from all the way from your on-premises domain with those users being synchronized into Azure Active Directory and then used to authenticate into custom applications that you're writing, for example. So that's pretty cool. It is standards-based, and you can see the list of standards that are supported by Azure Active Directory. So if you have an application you're writing that uses OAuth 2.0, that application can integrate into Azure Active Directory. Now, I will tell you now, we're not going to go really far down the path of that integration. I will tell you that if you are familiar with the current authentication architecture within .NET, in particular ASP.NET and the Owen security architecture, for me, the experience of working with the Azure authentication and Azure Active Directory is similar to that. All right, but this is more just sort of covering, let you know what's there. So some other things there, as I mentioned, it is a single sign-on solution and it is already used for popular cloud applications. There are literally hundreds of applications that your organization could integrate the authentication to provide a single sign-on. So for example, my favorite app, I will give them a plug here, Concur Solutions, which does, if you're familiar with them, does expense reporting. I was always horrible with expense reporting until I got that. Anyways, I digress. They are integrated into Azure Active Directory. So if you wanted to provide your organization with a single sign-on solution to that or hundreds of other existing cloud-based applications, you can do that through Azure Active Directory. All right? And it still gives you centralized management of users and centralized management of access, and you can extend, again, existing directory to the cloud. That's pretty cool. So I can take my on-premises Active Directory, synchronize the users from that, and notice I'm not saying synchronize the computers because it doesn't manage, Azure Active Directory doesn't manage computers, it just manages users. But in any case, I can synchronize my users up and then have those users connect up to my whatever cloud-based applications can be integrated. In fact, some cloud-based applications will even support user provisioning flowing through Azure Active Directory. So I could literally take my on-premises users, synchronize them into Azure Active Directory, and then set up to auto-provision those into certain cloud applications. It's pretty cool stuff. All right, now, there are really two forms of Azure Active Directory. There's standard and there is premium. All right, and standard is what you're going to get. It's just part of your Azure environment, or you can go ahead and choose to upgrade to the premium. When you upgrade to the premium, there are a few things that you get that are pretty cool. You get self-service group management and password reset. So in other words, you have this concept of groups, and you can have the concepts of groups flow from on-premises into Azure AD, but with the Premium, you can actually manage the groups within Azure AD directly. And you can also very easily spin up self-service password reset through the Azure AD. So if you've got folks that are off premises, that are off site, and they need to update their password, this would be a solution for that. That's part of the Premium. Maybe not necessarily the first thing that I would do. There's also SSO portal branding. So with this idea of Azure AD providing SSO capabilities, single sign-on capabilities, there's actually a portal so that as you register applications and those applications become part of your overall suite of functionality, there's a portal page that users can go to launch those applications through the single sign-on process. And if you have Premium, you can actually brand and customize that portal experience for your users. All right. You also have group-based access with Azure Active Directory Premium to these software as a service applications. So these cloud-based applications, you can actually configure group access to those. And you also get a number of other things. You get advanced reports and alerts. And we'll actually talk about this as one of the two key things we talk about in this course. In addition to that, you also get the multi-factor authentication for everyone. If you're not familiar with multi-factor authentication, we'll talk about that. The standard edition of Azure Active Directory allows for multi-factor authentication for your certain administrative roles within Azure. If you get the Azure Active Directory Premium, then you can actually use multi-factor authentication for all of the users that may be accessing different software as a service, or think about cloud-based applications through this single sign-on solution.